What you're looking at right now is a guy who lived in Japan for 6 months but never learned a single word of Japanese. What is that called? A chode? Anyways, without further ado, I know you guys are interested in this one, but first let's look at a bunch of pictures I took when I was in Japan. So without further ado, grab a blanket, turn off your lights for 12 true scary ghost stories that happened in Asia, in Japan.
Who screamed? One hot summer day, me and four of my friends were traveling around the countryside of old Tokyo. I rode my motorcycle and my friends drove a van. I stopped at a gas station to fill up my motorcycle. My friends stopped as well and bought some soft drinks to have in their van. We went shrine browsing and looked around the area. It was late, and the surrounding was already dark. We found an old motel and decided to stay there for the night. The old owner of the motel came out and greeted us. We decided to stay for a night in a suite room to save our money. There were 2 king-size beds in the room, more than enough for 5 people to stay in. We heard from the owner that some of the rooms were abandoned because of senile decay. Senile decay? Why abandon them and not reforming? The owner would want to do that altogether since reforming is expensive nowadays. We chatted until we heard a shocking voice of a little girl screaming sharp and long. Did you hear what I just heard? I asked my friends. We all went quiet and heard a second scream. We went out of our room and tried to find where the screaming was from. Give me the torch, said one of my friends. He took the torch and lit it ahead. We walked around the small corridor and found nothing. A while later, we heard another scream just right beside our room. We thought that there were some other people staying at the motel. The next morning, we asked the owner if they were little kids. We knocked on the door, but there was no response. The owner looked shocked and answered us. I am afraid there is no other guest last night, and the room beside the suite had been abandoned for more than 6 years. The owner had also told us that there was a past owner of the motel and he had a little daughter whom he abused to death in the property of this motel. Could that be the screaming ghost? Girl from the River. It was in the summer of 2012. Good time for walking or biking in Japan, because at wintertime you can't just get out of the house, especially when the snow is thick at around 5 meters on our place. I'm working at a construction company not so far from my apartment. If you will drive, it's around 5 to 7 minutes, but because it was summertime, I'm using my mountain bike that will take about 20 to 30 minutes from work until I get to my place. I've always taken the road where most people use, less danger, and I can see clearly on the road. Mostly when going home, I'm with my coworker Kenji, because his girlfriend was residing next building next to my apartment. One time when I was with him, he suggested to take a shortcut and use the route that will cross the river of Kaminokawa. Not much light there because the light post was not quite near to each other, but there's a part of it that will take around 5 minutes, that only the moonlight is your guide to see your path. From 30 minutes biking, it reduces it to 20 minutes because of that shortcut. One time, Kenji was sick and had to take a leave for 2 weeks. It's because I'm not with him, that's why I used the normal road again. But suddenly, my girlfriend from Tokyo messaged me that she'll be staying in my apartment for a week, which means for a week, I have to hurry home so I can see how she's doing. So, I sacrificed for a week using the easy way. On the second day of using the shortcut, I saw a person dressed in all white, had long hair around her waist, and she's facing the river. She's sitting on a bench with a light post near to the dark spot of the road. Because I was in a hurry, I don't really give her much attention. The next day I saw her again at around 8 p.m. This time she's standing on the railings of the river. That's why I can't help but to think that, what is this girl doing here alone like that? I don't really know her, and really, Japan has a really low crime rate. That's why I'm comfortable that she's safe, and I decided not to go near her. On the third day, I didn't see her anymore on the bench. Instead, I somehow see her in the middle of the dark spot of the road, standing on the railings and facing the river. Because it's dark here. That's why I decided to come to ask her what she's doing there and also to warn her. Around 10 meters away, I shout to her, "Konbawa!" which means hello at nighttime. It seems she didn't hear me, so I came nearer, but at around 2 meters away, I notice she's not on the roadside of the railings, she's on the other side. That's why I can't help but look where she is standing. When I have a clear look, I see that she is not standing on anything. She's floating on the river, and her hair is moving even though there is not much wind at the time. At that point, my whole body, including the hair from my wrist to the back of my neck and all my head, all stood up. I quickly turn around without knowing what is happening. My body is automatically responding to what I'm visualizing at that moment. I can't get focused on pedaling my bike. That's why I decide to push it while running. While running, I take a glimpse at her and saw her. She's beginning to turn around to me. It was so dark, and the next light post was around 40 meters away. I run as far as I can without taking a glimpse, thinking, she's near my back, she's near my back. The light post got near, but it seems to me it's still 100 miles away. Safely, I saw a car coming to me. His lights erased the darkness of the road, and I didn't see the girl anymore. I told it to Kenji, and we decide to not take that road ever again. Lately, we figured that that spot is where a girl around 17 years of age was hit and ran over by a car. Disha Song. I went on vacation in Japan to visit my grandmother, who lives in an old-fashioned Japanese house. It was quite beautiful. It had a koi pond in the back, with gorgeous vegetation surrounding it, fusuma sliding doors, a spacious porch, etc. It was a pretty old house built somewhere in the 1930s. My grandmother always told me stories of her childhood, and how she often saw geisha strolling around near it. Before you enter the house, you have to remove your shoes, so you never really hear loud footsteps on the wooden floors. My favorite place was to be in the garden where the pond was. Just 3 days after my family's arrival, I noticed something odd one day. I was in the garden and just enjoying the twilight and completely focused on the tranquility of it, when I started to hear singing. The melody of it was so captivating. I looked around for the source, and on the other end of the pond was the most charming geisha I'd seen. Her vestment was so elegant. She was wearing a traditional peach-colored silk kimono with lovely design, traditional geisha makeup that covered her delicate face, a beautiful umbrella with floral pattern at the top, and her hair was in a neat bun with floral ornaments in it. Shocked, I called out to her, but she didn't seem to notice me. Once all light sunlight was gone, so was she, leaving me confused. I ran inside to ask if anyone had heard the singing, but they just heard me calling out to someone, and that was it. I decided to shake it off, though I could tell by my grandmother's face that she knew something. Grandmother gave me the room that she never used, because there were no other rooms left, but I didn't mind at all. It was quite large, though kind of dirty because nobody used it. Once it was cleaned up, I was able to sleep in it. But that night, it felt depressing. In the morning I was fine, but still wondered about the experience. Somewhere around 4 p.m., the aroma of jasmine filled the air. But I was the only one who smelt it, so I thought. Grandmother was acting strange, always nervous and anxious. I never asked her about it. Again, at the same time, the geisha showed up singing her song, and again nobody heard it. Going to bed that night was awful because that same dreary feeling surrounded my room. This went on for almost a week. I asked grandmother about previous owners of the house. She told me that the house once belonged to a man who was very fond of pretty geisha. While thinking why the spirit of the young woman would not move on, I smelled a thick smell of blood. The type that would be on an untreated wound, and it was coming from my room. I slid the door open and was terrified at who was in it. The elegant geisha who I had seen and heard various nights was on the floor looking so broken and abused. She was wearing torn up gray rags, her hair a tangled mess with bruises all over her, but the most frightful thing was her eyes. Her pupils were so dilated as if she was panic-stricken, and they were full of tears and fear. I couldn't bear the sight, so I ran out of the house as fast as I could. The rest of my vacation basically unravels the story of the young woman's life. Disha Song 2. After what I'd seen, I was determined to find out what happened to her. Going back inside my room wasn't easy, but I had to because if anyone suspected anything wrong with me, they would want to leave the house. The next day, while I was in my room, I dropped a coin and it rolled under a large chest that was in the corner. Grandmother told me that it had been there since she was a child, so it hadn't been moved in years. Even though nothing was in there, it was still pretty heavy to move. When I pushed it just a bit, I noticed that one wooden board was out of place. When I finally got the old chest off of it, I picked up the board and there was something below it. Wrapped around a piece of white cloth was what looked to be antique jewelry box. I opened it and found old photos of men and women, one of the hair ornaments worn by the geisha, and what I think was a journal. Of course, I was amazed and nervous. Immediately, I put everything back except for the small booklet. It was very plain compared to the jewelry box, just a plain brown color. Even if I'm not all that fluent with the Japanese language, I could understand somewhat of what was written in the booklet. One of the pages in particular caught my attention. It read, "Okasan says I'm doing better than the rest of the geisha. She says it is because of my young charm and gift for song. I have gotten the attention of one particular man. He is a quite successful businessman. By the way he behaves around me, I can tell he might one day be my Dana. That is what I am dreading." The rest was to fade it out to read, and this was on the last page. The rest were blank. When my family went to do some shopping, I asked grandmother about the whole thing. She got very nervous, but eventually she gave in, and apparently grandmother knew the young woman. Her geisha name was Sukuhe, and her real name was Haruko Oshiro. Falling woman. What does she want? I'm currently studying overseas in Japan, visiting my relatives and all that jazz. They live 3 kilometers from the infamous suicide forest. To make sense of this story, I probably have to go back to 4 days earlier. My grandmother had been insisting on my visit for a long time because I'm in the country. At first I wasn't too keen on it, but I thought why not and finally went. I had to wait for break though, so it took a while. Fast forward to actually arriving at her house. My grandmother had already contacted my mother about the matter of staying with her. It was fine. Now, I'm going to tell you here and now that I'm a little bit skeptical about the existence of the paranormal. I've watched ghost adventures, ghost hunters, etc., but I'm not all that religious either. I think there might be a higher power, but I'm not really too sure. However, what I'm experiencing is convincing me otherwise about the existence of the paranormal. Now, let's get back to the original subject. Upon entering the house, I noticed immediately that A, it was hella small as my friends called it, and B, there was a sudden feeling of extreme cold on my chest, like somebody took a super cold ice and stuck it there. I asked my grandmother if they had an AC or a fan going, but she said no. I brushed it off as just imagination. My grandmother's house had been around for God knows how long. It's old enough for people to actually see signs of wear in some places. The inside is the modern one living room, 2 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, plus a guest room, and a small backyard. Upstairs is the guest room that overlooks the backyard. One of the bathrooms is also upstairs. I mostly stayed in the house and explored the backyard, which has an awesome Zen garden. I got to watch NHK with English subtitles. It's a Japanese TV channel, Google it. There were no incidents the first day other than that ice-cold feeling in the middle of my chest. I got the bedroom upstairs, which was above my grandparents' room. It was a traditional room with a tatami mats and sliding door that separate the room into halves. The first half of the room is the one you see when you walk in through the door. There are shelves with manga, anime, music, sandals, a small umbrella, etc. The second half after you open the sliding door is where the flat bed thingy on the floor is and the window straight ahead, overlooking the garden. I stooped to put my possessions in the bottom shelf when I was in the first half of the room. When I stood back up, I felt a very heavy sensation in my chest, the kind you get when you fall really fast towards something. I began to get dizzy and actually fell to my hands and knees. There were spots in my vision. As soon as it began, it stopped. I was about to get up while wondering what brought that on, when the same cold sensation from earlier hit my chest, but much, much harder. I also felt cold around my neck and couldn't breathe. I was terrified, and I wanted to get help, but I couldn't get a word out. This lasted for 30 seconds, but it felt much longer than that. As soon as I got my breath back, I rushed downstairs to tell my grandmother. She asked if I had health problems prior to the incident. Of course I said no, because I am a healthy person and I hardly get sick. She told me to sit down in the kitchen as she went to make tea. It tasted nasty. She told me it would help with me being ill. I was scared to go back upstairs, but she said I was probably been dehydrated and might have just caught something. The rest of the night went without anything happening. The second day, nothing happened as well, but in the night I thought I heard a woman talking near the window. It was a gentle voice, but there was a note of guilt in it. It sounded like she was apologizing and that the apology was directed at me. I could feel someone there as well, but I thought I was just being paranoid, until the same cold feeling in my chest came when the voice and presence started. I put the blanket over my head and eventually went to sleep, which all leads to now. I haven't been able to get much sleep. Grandma thinks I'm sick. She even told me today that I look like a raccoon due to the dark circles under my eyes. The sensations that are happening at night are still happening. I was hesitant to share my story, but my friends encouraged me, so I'm giving it a shot. I have started having a dream over and over again as well. It has a reoccurring pattern. The dream usually happens right after I can't stay awake any longer and fall asleep. I end up in a forest in broad daylight with thick fog. There's a dirt path that leads to a cliff. I'm probably on a mountain. I don't know, because once I come out of the forest, there's no detours and a sheer drop 2.5 feet in front of me. Where the dirt path ends, I can't see anything in the distance. I can't go back the way I came. There's grass everywhere. That's when a falling woman comes out of nowhere and falls past the rocky edge of the cliff with her arm outstretched, like she's trying to catch herself on said edge. She always misses. That was the first time, but now every time she comes falling down, an overwhelming urge to catch her takes over me. I run for the edge of the cliff, only my hands to merely brush hers and miss. Sometimes I'll hear a splash of water way far down, and everything becomes icy, just unbearably cold. I can't see the water, but when the splash is heard at times, it feels like my whole body is drenched in ice water and I can't breathe, like I'm drowning. I told my grandmother, and at first she didn't believe me. Until last night, I actually caught the falling woman in my dream. When I caught her wrist, she took a hold of mine. Excruciating pain was in my shoulder and wrist, like I caught something heavy with one arm. She had a really tight grip. She looked to be 20 years old. She had long brown hair, brown eyes, and she wore a dirty white dress that looked like it went through mud. Her skin was a bit tan, but also pale. She had streaks of mud on her face. The woman said the same thing that the lady by the window did. "I'm sorry." To be honest, it scared me. I woke up today with a red hand mark around my wrist and my shoulder felt dislocated. Lucky me, it wasn't. My grandmother doesn't really know what to do, but she is researching. I can't sleep because I'm scared of the dream. I don't stay upstairs by myself. I completely avoid it during the day, and I stay up as much as I can despite being so freaking tired. I just don't want to go to sleep. I still get the sensations in my chest and around my neck, but they're less intense. Strangely gentle in some instances. I can still feel her presence. I don't know what she wants. I need help. Any advice is appreciated. Azure Ancient Graves. It was a dark, gloomy night in Japan. I was there for a holiday with my friends. We were at the countryside near Mount Fuji and were staying in a deserted wooden hut, which was in shambles. We would prefer staying in a hotel, but unfortunately, our car had broken down and we were stranded in the middle of nowhere. Our group, 3 girls and 3 guys, were extremely cold and had to put on a few more layers to keep warm. It was about 10 degrees. I and the 2 other girls went out to the well to get water from the dilapidated well way behind the hut to boil as we were extremely thirsty. In 10 minutes, we were there. I was a little freaked out as it was very dark and there was no one but us, and there was a very strange feeling around us out of a sudden. "Hey, hurry, draw the water, this place is weird," said Joanne. She was pale already. Suddenly, a white object came floating down. It had long white hair which reached the ground. We shrieked and turned around to run for the house. Then, we realized Joanne was missing. The other girl, Shauna, and I clutched each other in fear. We made our way slowly to the well. We saw Joanne in the inside of the well screaming for help as she hung to the hooks of the well. Then, the guys appeared. "Hey, Leon! Hurry, pull her up! She can't hang on!" Shauna yelled to them. They rushed to the well and pulled Joanne up. Joanne collapsed on the ground. "A white thing! Ghost!" she murmured. Leon, Jack, and Alex grinned guiltily. "You!" I screamed, catching on to their guilty faces. Yeah, we put this, white sheet and mask with a mop head. Are you angry?" "You girls are really freaked out," Jack said nervously as he knew we were angry with him for this trick. "Alex, are you in this too?" I asked accusingly. Alex smiled sheepishly. I and Shauna screamed. We pulled Joanne up and stalked to the house. The guys looked at each other and took after us. In the house, Joanne, Shauna, and I were not speaking to the guys and blatantly refused to look at them. The guys were whispering nervously. Then the guy stood up. We're sorry, okay? Don't be angry." "Sorry?" Jack offered. "Yeah," Alex started. The next thing we knew, the door swung open. A wailing thing glided in. It had a monstrous head with one eye. It was flying near the ceiling in circles. We all screamed and ran to each other. I clutched Alex and screamed, while Alex looked pale. Shauna had fainted already, and Leon was screaming for help. Joanne and Jack were at the furthest corner of the room, hiding themselves under a huge towel. The thing floated around the room. All of us grabbed our bags and ran for our Jeep. We locked ourselves in. Jack tried to start the car, and miraculously it worked. He stepped on the escalating pedal, and we shot off. Then, I noticed a sign as we passed. "Graves of the Ancient" was the road name translated in English. I casted a fearful look at the sign and squeaked in horror. Then I closed my eyes and waited for the place to be out of sight. I never wanted to remember that horrible place. 3 hours later, we reached a small town and lodged in a motel. The old lady we spoke to about what had happened nodded seriously and said, "That place is haunted. Many people had died there when they were fighting against monsters 300 years ago. The thing that you saw was Azare, the king monster's son." Saipan Airport World War II bomb shelter soldiers. In May of 2008, I went to the island of Saipan. Saipan is near Guam in Japan. Before World War II, Saipan belonged to the Japanese. The Japanese had an airport there that had military buildings and bomb shelters. In World War II, the US military fought for the island of Saipan and took it from the Japanese. The bomb shelters are all well built and still standing today. The new airport is built nearby. On a beautiful sunny day, I was exploring a bomb shelter. I was alone and happy and having a nice relaxing time. Birds and insects were making their usual noise, and it was really peaceful. I went into the small door in the middle of the bomb shelter and stood just inside the door. I looked at the 2 rooms for people on the left and right side of the door. The 2 rooms were empty except for some crumbled concrete, litter, and some rustled metal sticking out from the walls. The light in the bomb shelter was pretty bright, since it was so sunny outside. As I was standing there right inside the doorway, quietly looking around, the lights suddenly started to get really dim inside the bomb shelter, and I heard a rushing sound in my ears. The rushing sound was like if you put coffee cups over your ears, but much louder. Then a shadow rushed right by me and sat down on the bench seat that was now mounted on the formerly rusted metal sticking out from the wall. Several more shadows rushed by me and sat on the bench seats. One shadow would rush to the left room and the next would rush to the right room. The shadows were rushing by about every second, and if they had both gone the same direction, they would have collided. It looked like they had practiced drills of rushing into the bomb shelter quite a bit before. I could see the shadows. They looked like they were made out of gray cigarette smoke. I could see their heads and their bodies, but not their feet or hands. I saw that they were thin Japanese soldiers. They looked like they were about 5 feet tall and weighed about 100 pounds or less. Their uniforms were tidy and well maintained, but the clothes looked like it was thin and getting worn out. I noticed that they all had their hats still on too. Nobody lost one during the rush. As each soldier rushed to the bench, he scooted over and made as much room for the next guy as he could. All the soldiers stared at the door and hoped more soldiers were coming. As each shadow rushed by, I realized that there was not enough room in the doorway and they were actually going to go through me to get inside the bomb shelter. I could feel them pass through me. It felt the same as if I was holding my breath and releasing it as each shadow passed by. They were rushing by about 1 shadow per second. I may have actually been holding my breath as each shadow passed by, and that's what I felt, and not the shadows at all. I will never know about that detail. Then, I could hear a loud rumble approaching in the distance and a few explosions. I could see the soldiers were still looking in the open door and waiting for the rest of their comrades. There were a few more empty spaces on the benches. I turned to look at the door too, and I was surprised by the really bright light from the sunny day outside. I turned back to look at the soldiers, and the bomb shelter was bright again, and all the shadow soldiers were gone. Unbelievable. Before I shifted into my new house in Osaka, Japan, my mother told me not to go to the field opposite our house because she said something bad will happen to me. So I listened to her, but not long. One day, she went out to have buffet with my father. I didn't want to follow because I really wanted to go to the field opposite, so after they left, I went to the field. When I reached there, I felt a wind past me, and I heard a woman and a child calling my name. I went to search who was calling my name. I turned around but saw nobody. I felt scared. I ran back to my house and heard the woman and child call my name again. I went straight to my bedroom, trying not to think about it. 1 hour later, my parents came back. I told them about it. They scolded me and told me that there was an accident there. A woman calling her child, but a car crashed into the field where she was standing and she died. Her child heard the news and was shocked to death. So, I never went to the field again. Spirits of Okinawa. I was brought up and always felt it was best to speak to someone of my experiences. My tradition, Native American, we do have many beliefs in the spiritual and unworldly creatures. My family shares the same gift as I do, and of course, not all of us have it. I was told by my grandmother that we have a strong line of medicine men and women in our family. When I was young, I was able to sense the presence of a spirit. As I got older, my senses heightened, and it came to where I knew if it was male or a female, a child or an adult. Now it's to where I see them. Sometimes shadows, mist, a glow, and others as real as anyone else. Right now I live in Okinawa, Japan. I moved here in April 2010. My family calls this a gift, but at times it's real fear. I've been trying to control what I allow myself to see and feel, which hasn't been easy. There is so much activity on this island that at different times it's difficult to filter what's actually there and what's actually not. I had 3 experiences that will forever stay with me. The first time I arrived here, my husband was driving past a military area which I felt very uncomfortable. After that feeling, I saw a male Japanese walking along the road in front of us. Something about him was unsettling. I could feel it in my gut and under my skin. To me, the way he was walking didn't seem that he touched the ground. Twice it looked like he would bulb up taller then back down to size. After seeing this, I couldn't take my eyes off of him. It was towards the evening, just before dark. There was a light glow with some pink and purple in the sky. As we drove closer, he started to fade away. We got to the point where I'd seen him last. I started looking around with no sign of him anywhere. My husband asked, "What's wrong?" I explained to him that I didn't like the feeling the area was giving and what I saw. He then explained to me about the area and the stories that are connected to it. Unfortunately, I can't share details due to it being a military base. He told me that it's an old MUN storage, and there were some deaths involved, sounds of guns and explosions in the distance where there shouldn't be. There's times when guards will see old Japanese soldiers geared up for battle, and upon being approached, they would disappear. For all I know, what I saw that evening could have been a Japanese soldier back in 1945. My second encounter was here in my own home. I live in what Japanese call a mansion, but it's actually an apartment, American style. For several days, whenever I woke up to go to the bathroom, I felt someone watching from the spare room. Night after night this continued. The room has always felt stuffy and dark. I went into the room one night to confront whatever was in there. My entire body started to tingle and I felt almost empty. I had to get out of the room and went right back to bed. That night, I slept close to my husband. Third time, I was home alone. My husband was working the night shift. I was asleep when noises at the foot of my bed woke me up. It was the sound of crinkling paper. I laid in bed listening to it, and then it stopped. We didn't own any animals at this time, I admit. I was scared. After that, I felt a presence. It felt like a child, pacing back and forth from the foot of my bed to the side of the bed I was sleeping on. My body started getting the chills and feeling sick in the stomach. The only other way I can describe it was the feeling of a hangover. I covered my head and fell back to sleep. But not for long. I woke up to what I thought was my husband finally home. My nerves could finally settle. I could hear his boot on the tile floor walk from the door to the office, but he never came to the room. I thought he wasn't tired yet, and he probably went in the office to play on the computer. So, I fell asleep. I woke up to the floor creak on our bedroom door, half asleep thinking my husband was finally coming to bed. As this presence got closer to the bed and leaned over, I knew it wasn't him. All I could do was lay in bed with this thing staring at me inches away from my face. I imagined myself grabbing its hair and pushing it away from me. After a few moments, which felt like hours, my heart stopped racing. Still scared though. I mustered up the courage to get out of bed to tell my husband what happened and to come to bed. I got up and the place was dark. I wondered if he stepped out, but there was no evidence of him ever being home. I slept light for the rest of the night, with the TV on, and heard the front door open this time. I yelled out my husband's name to make sure it was him. Thank God, it was him. I don't know how much more I could have taken. I told him my experience, that we are getting a cat and I was gonna smudge the house in the morning. When I woke up, I was angry about what these spirits put me through. I smudged our home. Fed up, I was basically yelling at them to get out. In my tradition, cats can see spirits and they will protect those they love. We now own 2 cats. And since that day, I haven't had any encounters in my home anymore. Outside is another story. The Cry in Okinawa. Back in July of year 2010, I had a trip to Okinawa, located on the south of Japan with Tokyo's teenage Catholics and a few fathers too. Yes, I am Catholic, but don't judge me by my religion. To be remembered, Okinawa is one of the places in Japan which had suffered the consequences of World War II, being attacked by the US military. Because of that, many people have died, including Japanese civilians, Japanese military, and US military. Since I already studied about Okinawa's story, I had a strange feeling that something spiritual will happen there before I visited. And Okinawa is one of the places that have a US military base. I believe that on the second day of the trip, we're guided by a local person to an underground-made cave called Gamma, which was used to be a local people's place of refuge in case of aerial bombing run. and because of the low hygiene, many people have died there, such as children, women, elders, and even sick or injured people. The cave itself was slippery because of the rain and was too dark, or should I say, pure darkness, pure black. Because of that, we have to move with the hand lights. While we were advancing, we had a moment to turn off the lights to see how dark it really was. The cave was also chilly rather than cold. A few seconds later, I heard a woman's crying voice in the cave, but I've noticed that there wasn't the voices of the girls with us. Note, only 2 girls with us. And then I start to think to myself, this is not a living person's voice. Later, we went out of the cave, and in order to confirm, I asked the girls if one of them had cried, but the answer was, none of us cried there. I asked the boys too. The same answer. I wonder what the crying woman's spirit wanted to tell me or us. My story in Japan. My first experience was when I went to Japan for a family visit over the summer. It's been a long time since I visited them. I was only 15, and that's when it happened. Before I went to Japan, some of my friends would tell me ghost stories about Japan. I thought they were just teasing me, so I ignored them. When I arrived, it was going well. The first week of my stay in Japan was going very fine, but I felt as though a shadow was following me. I kept having this feeling like someone had been watching me for a while. One time, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was still sleepy. I don't know why, but I decided to get up. But when I looked over to my shadow, I found another shadow behind my shadow. I quickly turned around, but no one was there. I was freaked out, so I went to talk to my mom and dad, but they would not listen to me. I went back to sleep, but felt a warm hand touch my forehead. I was scared, so I just pulled the blanket over my head and closed my eyes tight. The next morning, I talked to my grandma and told her about it. She told me that it must be her late daughter's dead son, who died at age 17 of a fever a long time ago. She told me not to be scared because he wouldn't do any harm to me. Even if she said not to be scared, I was still scared. Ever since I told my grandma about it, she would tell me stories about the time when he was still alive and that he was a nice man. For some time, a few weird things happened, but I just ignored them or forced myself to sleep. On our leave, we waved goodbye to my grandma and the others. When we got into the car, I stared into the house from the corner of my eye. I saw a man by the window waving by. I turned to look, but no one was there. I then noticed that the man was from the room I was staying in. I was scared, but I was glad that we left, because I didn't know what might happen if I stayed a little longer there. Demon encounter in Tokyo, Japan. The year was 1978, and I was 15 years old. My best friend had returned to Japan after spending a year attending our junior high school in the States while her father was a visiting professor at the local university. I missed her terribly and was able to persuade my grandfather to send me to Japan to visit her during that coming summer. I arrived on a July evening, completely exhausted of course, yet terribly excited. My friend and her mother showed me to my room, which was the only traditional Japanese room in the home, one with tatami matting and sliding doors. This is a feature common to fairly affluent homes in Japan, modern construction and conveniences for the majority of the house, with one traditionally Japanese room. I recall that, when her mother opened the corner closet to retrieve the futon mats, that would be my bed. A cold chill emanated from it. I thought nothing of it. Of course, an enclosed space would be less affected by the ambient temperature of a room. I slept very soundly that first night. The following night after I had retired, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house as it was winding down for the evening. I heard light switches click off and bedroom doors upstairs closing. I was imagining what new adventures we might have tomorrow. I then began to hear a faint laughter. It seemed to be coming from perhaps the neighboring house. Perhaps there was a little get-together over there. Then the laughter became louder. The laughter became closer. The laughter was menacing. It was decidedly evil. Man's laughter, which now closed in around my ears, growing louder and louder. Hey, just get up and go upstairs and get your friend. I was wide awake. I tried to do just that, only to find that I could not move. Not a muscle. My instinct and unusual spiritual training for a young person kicked in. I had practiced yoga since I was a very young child, and just before leaving, my yoga instructor had mentioned something about an East Indian holy man. The mere mention of his name dispelled negative energies. I tried to say his name aloud. I was ready to try anything. To my horror, I discovered that I could not speak. Fear freezes, my instinct told me. What I have to do in this mist of terror is to relax. I began to imagine myself floating through a starry night sky. A calm in the midst of the storm around me came over me. I tried to speak the name of the holy man again, and this time, I was able to mouth the word, though still no sound came out. As I did so, it was as if a switch had been turned off. The evil laughter, which had become deafening about my ears, stopped. I was able to move and considered running upstairs to my friend, yet somehow, I knew that I was safe now, so I thought I would not wake her. The following day, a number of my friends' friends came by for a welcoming tea. I told a story of what had happened to me. Oh yes, that was kanashibare, they told me, quite matter-of-factly, which means wrapped in bandages. It was a common thing which occurs in Japan, whereby some spirit or another who happens to be roaming about decides to have a bit of fun with a resting human. They proceeded to tell me other tales of spirits, both playful and malevolent, who specialized in turning children around in their beds so that their heads would be where their feet had been when they awoke. They were not surprised in the least by my experience, and had no trouble believing that I had indeed been awake and this was no dream. The entity was likely a demonic one, judging from my description, they said, and I imagined that anyone who heard that laughter would concur. The direction from whence the laughter had originated, I realized, had been the bedding closet which had exhibited the chilly draft the night before. I took from that experience the notion that calm in the presence of malevolent entities is a powerful strategy. Indeed, my later studies of martial arts would serve to underscore that conclusion. Don't strike when you are angry. I once heard a Tibetan monk say, "You might miss,